Hello, hello, hello again. This is Greg Dotson with Community of Believers Church in Olive Branch, Mississippi. Again, I wanted to come here and give you an encouraging word today on grief, or I would even venture to say depression, because grief often leads to depression. And so it's interesting when you think about grief, particularly in the church. Believers have some stigma, if you will, when it comes to grief. We feel like as believers, because we know God and because we're saved and because we have faith, that we somehow shouldn't experience grief or depression. And that just couldn't be farther from the truth. We need not look too long in the scriptures to find many a people that have suffered through this thing called grief and depression. Elijah, for instance, when he had that awesome showdown with the prophets of Baal and Ahab, and there he was raining down fire from heaven. Then just not too long after that, he was asking God to take his life. Y'all, that is grief. That is depression. Paul felt like when he was on his missionary journeys, he felt like he had the sentence of death on his life. That's depression. And yet there's one more, and this is the one I want to bring out today. That's about a guy by the name of King David. Yes, King David. You would think somebody like David, a man known after God's own heart, surely he wouldn't have any depression. But the scriptures reveal in Psalm 13 that he had just that. If you read it, and again, you don't really have to read it closely, you can see real clearly that he is very frustrated. He is going through some grief. He's going through some depression. And I just want to just encourage you as we go through this COVID-19 crisis to don't think that you're alone when it comes to your human response, right? Your human experience to this COVID-19 crisis and all of the demands, the shelter in place, being on lockdown, and even with loved ones, right? Loved ones are being ill, not being able to see them. Some of you may have even lost some loved ones, whether it's through COVID-19 or what have you. And you're struggling with this, right? You're struggling trying to just make it from day to day. Well, let me encourage you. Number one, you're not alone. King David, a man known after God's own heart, suffered from this thing called grief/depression. And so I just want to lift up this passage and hopefully encourage you to keep pushing at this thing, that you're not alone, and that you can survive this time. Psalm 13, David opens up again, really complaining, if you will, but really opening up and just being honest about how he feels. He says, "How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord, forever?" In other words, he's been praying for a long time and God hasn't answered him. And he's thinking that God is, at this point, is just not going to answer. And some of you may have been feeling like that God is not answering, that God is not going to answer because he hadn't done anything yet. Then listen to what he says after that. "How long shall thou hide thy face from me?" So he went from thinking that God wasn't going to answer to God is just simply ignoring him. And maybe some of you feel like that, but let's keep reading. He says, "How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily?" So this is not a one-time thing. This is not a every other week thing. David is suffering through this on a day-to-day basis. Every time he wakes up, he's having to deal with whatever he's dealing with, and he's frustrated with this thing. And he says, he goes on to say, and this is where he really starts communicating his pain. And that's what I encourage you to do, to communicate, to open up your mouth, share it with somebody, and communicate your pain. Share it with God, but also share it with other believers. Listen to what he says. He says, "Consider and hear me, O Lord my God. Lighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death." Now, if that is not depression, if that is not going through some grief, I don't know what is. He is, in other words, he is saying that he wants to go to sleep and not wake up anymore. And I guarantee you there are many a believer that feel the same way. That feel like they just want to go to sleep and don't want to wake up anymore because they are depressed. They are going through grief. But one thing that's awesome about this passage is that it doesn't end there. That's so exciting. Listen to what he says. He says, but I have trusted. Oh man, what a transition. And listen to this, but I have trusted in thy mercy. So in other words, nothing has changed in the situation, but somehow he looks back over his life and he understands the faithfulness of God and appreciates it and says, okay, look, nothing's changed, but I've trusted in your mercy. And then he says, my heart shall rejoice in thy salvation. Now, it's not rejoicing yet. Be clear on that. It's not rejoicing yet. His heart is not rejoicing at this time. He's not rejoicing, but he's looking forward to the day. In light of the faithfulness of God, the track record that he has, he's looking forward to rejoicing again. And then he says this, and I'm done. He says, I will sing to the Lord. Why? Why is he going to sing in such a time as this? Why is he going to sing with whatever he's going through, whether it's running from Absalom, running from Saul, trying to figure out how to do life, encourage people, encourage himself? How is he going to do all this? He says, why is he going to sing? He says, I'm going to sing because the Lord has dealt bountifully with me in all of what he was going through, and all of the frustration, the depression, the grief that he was going through. He says, look, at one day, I'm going to sing again to the Lord because he's dealt bountifully with me. Wow. He realized that even though he was going through a tough time, he concluded that God overall had dealt bountifully with me. And if you think about it long enough, my brothers and sisters, God has dealt bountifully with you, and he will continue to do that. Hang in there, stay encouraged. God has got us, and we're going to do this thing. Communicate your pain, share it with God. Be open about your depression, but know that God is going to deliver you. Amen.